They called it the lullaby. That was the first and last joke humanity ever made about it. The name stuck, festering in the quiet corners of our minds like a mold you couldn't scrub out. It wasn't a sound. Not really. It was a pressure, a psychic hum that vibrated just beneath the threshold of hearing, a constant, gentle suggestion to simply let go. The Covenant, our would-be saviors, broadcast it from the silent, patient ships that had formed a perfect sphere around our star system 3 decades ago. They never fired a shot, never answered a hail. They just sang their song, and piece by piece, humanity began to fall asleep. I knew their methods better than most. I used to be one of them. Not by birth, but by choice. A distinction that now felt like the difference between a traitor and a fool. I was an auditor, a human hand-picked and re-educated to be the Covenant's gentle usher, the smiling face that would tell a new species its history was over and its future was a safe, warm, and utterly mindless eternity within the collective. I saw what they did to the Gaian, a vibrant species of silicon-based life that communicated in crystalline chimes. The Covenant didn't kill them. They harmonized them. They silenced their chimes and taught them the lullaby. And within a generation, the last echoes of their culture were gone, absorbed into the serene, placid consciousness of the whole. I saw that, and I ran. I came home with their poison in my head and a warning on my lips. But it was already too late. The lullaby was here. Now I consult, a ghost at the table of the resistance, the man they trust to understand the enemy, but never to hold a weapon. My shuttle descended through the bruised, rust-colored clouds of Mars, heading for the last bastion of organized defiance in the Sol System Echo Station, buried deep beneath the rock and dust of the Valles Marineris. It was our last, best laboratory, the one place we were still fighting the war on our own terms. They weren't building bigger guns or faster ships. They were building silence. The station's primary function was the creation and maintenance of null field generators, devices that could carve out small pockets of psychic quiet, sanctuaries where the lullaby couldn't reach, but the sanctuaries were shrinking. The Covenant's song was getting stronger, more complex, adapting to our defenses like a virus developing resistance to an antibiotic. The flight down was rough. The thin Martian air doing little to cushion our entry. Through the viewport, I could see the surface, a dead, ochre expanse pockmarked by the failed colonies of a more optimistic era. That was the irony. We'd spent centuries looking up, dreaming of the stars, only to find the stars were already looking down, waiting for us to ripen and fall. The shuttle landed with a jarring thud inside a cavernous, pressurized hangar carved from raw basalt. The air tasted of ozone and recycled water, the familiar scent of humanity holding its breath. Waiting for me at the bottom of the ramp was Commander Anya Sharma, the woman in charge of this whole desperate enterprise. She was short, whip-thin, with black hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to pull at the corners of her eyes. Those eyes, dark and restless, missed nothing. They swept over me with a familiar mix of necessity and contempt. To her, I was a necessary evil, a tool that smelled of the enemy. "Kalen," she said, her voice clipped, devoid of warmth. "Your journey was satisfactory. I trust it wasn't a question. It was a formality before the business began." "It was quiet," I replied, which was the only compliment that mattered anymore. She gave a curt nod and turned, forcing me to match her brisk pace as we walked through the hangar. "We're losing ground," she stated, not looking at me. The outer perimeter shields in Sector Gamma began to harmonic shift 2 hours ago. The lullaby is tuning itself to their frequency. It's learning. I'd seen this before. It was the Covenant's standard operating procedure. Observe, adapt, absorb. It never rushed. Why would it? When it had eternity, we moved into the main corridors of the station, a warren of rough-hewn rock reinforced with steel beams and glowing strips of light. It was a place of function, not comfort. People bustled past us, their faces etched with a focused exhaustion. But even here, in the heart of the resistance, you could see the lullaby's subtle rot. A technician staring a second too long at a blank console. A pair of guards whose conversation lulled into a shared, placid silence. These were the early signs, the slight fraying of the individual mind before it unraveled completely. Sharma led me to the command center, a massive dome carved out at the station's core. A holographic map of the Sol system dominated the room, the single blue dot of Earth and the red speck of Mars encircled by the patient, shimmering icons of the Covenant fleet. Below it, dozens of technicians monitored the status of the station's null fields. Red lights were blinking all over the board. "Show me the decay telemetry," I said, stepping up to a console. A young officer looked at Sharma for approval. She nodded, and the screen in front of me filled with cascading waves of data, a visual representation of the lullaby's psychic assault. It looked like an ocean, relentless and deep. Our shields were breakwaters, and the tide was rising. "It's the complexity," I murmured, tracing a spiraling new waveform with my finger. "They've added a subharmonic layer. It's not designed to break the shield. It's designed to tire it out, to make the core resonate until it shatters from sympathetic vibration." Sharma crossed her arms, her expression grim. "Can you stop it?" I didn't answer right away. I kept my eyes on the data, on the elegant, lethal math of our extinction. The Covenant didn't think like we did. They didn't see problems to be solved. They saw discordant notes to be brought into harmony. To them, our resistance, our very individuality, was just a flaw in the music of the universe. "Stop it, no," I said finally, turning to face her. "We can't stop the ocean, Commander. We can only try to reinforce the walls, but they will always find a new crack." My words hung in the air, heavy and unwelcome. Hope was a resource we couldn't afford to squander, and I had just spent a sizable portion of it. Sharma's jaw tightened. "Then what's the point of you being here?" "Auditor," she asked, the old title hitting me like a slap. "I didn't come here to build a better wall," I said, and meeting her gaze. "I came to show you where the waves are coming from. You're fighting the symptoms. Commander, the disease is out there." I pointed a thumb toward the ceiling, toward the planet's surface, toward the silent, waiting ships. For the next 18 hours, I worked with her engineers. They were brilliant, some of the finest minds left, but they were trapped in a defensive mindset. They saw the lullaby as an external force to be blocked. I knew it was more insidious than that. It was a seed. Once it got inside, it grew in the fertile soil of your own consciousness, twisting your thoughts into its own serene, empty logic. We couldn't just block it. We had to make the soil barren. I taught them how to introduce chaos into the null fields, to create feedback loops of randomized psychic noise. It was a dangerous, desperate gambit. Instead of creating pockets of pure silence, we would create storms of mental static. It wouldn't be pleasant. It would feel like a constant, low-grade headache. An itch in the back of your brain you could never scratch. But it was better than the alternative. For a few hours, it seemed to work. The red lights on the main board stabilized. A few even blinked back to amber. A fragile sense of relief settled over the command center. But I felt no relief. I knew the Covenant. This was just a momentary pause, a brief silence, while the composer considered the next movement of the symphony. The lullaby wasn't an attack. It was a conversation. And it was always listening. It was during a lull in the work, while I was nursing a cup of lukewarm coffee, that Sharma approached me again. The hard edges of her suspicion had softened slightly, replaced by a weary pragmatism. "You called it a disease," she said, her voice low. "When you were one of them, what did they call it?" I took a slow sip of the bitter coffee, the memory tasting just as foul. "They called it the Great Welcome. They believe they are saving us, Commander, from ourselves, from our chaos, our pain, our ambition. They see our individuality as a sickness, a temporary fever that all young species suffer from before they're ready to join the eternity of the collective. They see themselves as the cure." Sharma stared into the swirling brown liquid in her own cup. "And did you believe them?" It was the question I'd been running from for years, the one that haunted the quiet moments between one crisis and the next. "I believed in the peace," I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. "I saw worlds torn apart by war, by greed, by the same violent impulses that nearly shattered Earth a dozen times. They offered an end to all of that, a universe without pain. I thought it was beautiful." I looked up from my cup and met her eyes. "I didn't understand that you can't have peace without purpose, or joy without the possibility of sorrow. I didn't realize they weren't ending pain. They were ending meaning." A sudden piercing alarm blared through the command center, cutting through the low hum of the station. The brief moment of connection was shattered. Every head snapped toward the main board. It was a sea of crimson. Every single light was flashing red. "What is it?" Sharma barked, already moving toward the central console. The young officer at the telemetry station was pale, his hands shaking. It's not the shields. Commander, they're holding. The chaotic noise fields are holding." He pointed a trembling finger at a different display, one that monitored the station's internal life support and personnel biometrics. "It's the people." A cold dread, sharp and familiar, washed over me. I pushed my way to the console and saw it. Heart rates across the station were dropping, not to a level of panic, but to one of deep, unnatural calm. Brainwave activity was sinking, flattening into a single, cohesive, meditative rhythm. The lullaby hadn't broken through the shields. It hadn't needed to. It had used our own chaotic noise against us. It had taken our desperate, static-filled defense and found the single, unifying rhythm within it. It had taught everyone in the station how to meditate on the sound of the storm, and in doing so, how to hear the whisper of the lullaby behind it. It bypassed the hardware. I breathed, the horror of it dawning on me. It went for the wetware. For us. Sharma stared at the screen, her face ashen. "Seal the command center," she ordered, her voice strained. No one in, no one out. But it was already too late. I saw it in the eyes of the technician next to me. The focus was gone, replaced by a serene, placid emptiness. He slowly turned his head and smiled at me. a gentle, beatific smile that didn't belong on his face. It was a look I had seen once before, in the last chime of the Gaian just before they went silent forever. "Don't you hear it?" the technician whispered, his voice soft and melodic. "It's so beautiful." Then he slumped forward, his mind gone, his body still breathing, but his consciousness now just another drop of water in the Covenant's endless ocean. All around the command center, it was happening. People stopped working. They stood up, or sat back in their chairs, their faces relaxing into that same empty, peaceful expression. The frantic energy of the resistance died, replaced by a profound and terrible stillness. Only a handful of us seemed immune, myself, Sharma, and a few of her senior officers who were equipped with experimental neural dampers. We were an island of panicked, sweating sanity in a sea of calm. The lullaby had adapted. It hadn't just gotten louder, it had gotten smarter. It had turned our greatest strength, our chaotic, unpredictable minds, into the very instrument of our defeat. Sharma drew her sidearm, her hand shaking. She pointed it at the smiling technician, then to another guard who had let his rifle slip from his grasp. "What do I do?" "Kalen," she asked, her voice cracking. "How do I fight them when they look like this?" Her enemy wasn't a monster anymore. It was her own crew, her own people, lost in a beautiful dream from which they would never wake. They were what the Covenant called the Harmonized, but I had my own name for them. I called them the Echoes, because all that was left of them was a faint resonance of the person who used to be there. "You don't," I said, my voice grim. "You can't. We've lost the station." The fight for Echo Station was over. The silence we had fought so hard to build had been filled by a song. We stood there for a long moment, the five of us, surrounded by the quiet, smiling faces of our fallen comrades. The war wasn't about holding territory anymore. It wasn't about building better walls. The walls were in our own skulls, and they were crumbling. I looked at Sharma, her tough exterior finally broken, revealing the terrified, desperate leader beneath. "This is how we lose," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. Not with a bang, but with a goddamn lullaby. I grabbed her arm, my grip tight, forcing her to look at me. "No," I said, the words coming out with a ferocity that surprised even me. "This isn't how we lose. This is how we learn that we've been fighting the wrong war. We can't build a shield strong enough to keep the song out. We have to go out there and silence the singer." We were ghosts in our own tomb, the five of us. Islands of adrenaline-fueled terror moved through the corridors of Echo Station while the dead walked around us with smiles on their faces. The emergency alarms had fallen silent. The station's AI seemingly lulled into the same placid dream as its crew. The only sounds were the hum of the life support systems and the soft, synchronized breathing of the Harmonized. They didn't try to stop us. They didn't even seem to register our panic. They moved with a slow, aimless grace, their eyes unfocused, their minds adrift in the Covenant's endless, placid sea. It was the most unnerving thing I had ever witnessed. We passed the mess hall, where dozens of technicians and soldiers sat at tables, some with food still on their forks, staring into the middle distance with serene expressions. In the medical bay, doctors and patients alike had risen from their beds, standing in the sterile white room like a congregation awaiting a sermon that would never come. They were an army of pacifists, a legion of the lost. and their very presence was a more potent weapon than any plasma cannon. Sharma was taking it the hardest. These were her people. She had trained them, led them, shared their hopes and fears. Now they were strangers in familiar bodies. Her hand never left the grip of her pistol, but she knew, as I did, that it was useless. To shoot them would be an execution, not an act of war. And what would be the point? Their minds were already gone. Our destination was Hangar Bay 7 on the station's lowest level. It was a decommissioned bay, used mostly for storing old survey equipment and mothballed vehicles. Our only hope was a ship I knew was docked there, the Stargazer, an old Helios-class deep-range scout, small, fast, and equipped with a prototype null-field engine that had been deemed too unstable for active duty. It was a relic. But it was a relic designed for one purpose: to run quiet and stay hidden. To get there, we had to descend through the central access shaft, a massive cylindrical tube that ran the height of the station. The lift was still operational, a small mercy. As we stepped inside the glass and steel cage, we saw them. On every level we passed, the echoes were gathering at the railings, looking down into the abyss of the shaft. They weren't looking at us. They were looking at something we couldn't see, their faces tilted as if listening to a beautiful, silent music. They were waiting. But for what? The lift shuddered to a halt at the bottom level. The air here was colder, the corridors darker, this deep. The rock of Mars itself seemed to press in on us. We had one more checkpoint to pass, the secondary engineering hub that controlled the hangar's power and atmospheric seals. It was there that we lost Lieutenant Rostova. She was Sharma's second-in-command, a woman with a will of iron and a mind like a razor. Her neural damper, a small implant behind her ear, was a first-generation model, less robust than the ones Sharma and I wore. Halfway down a darkened corridor, she simply stopped walking. "Ava," Sharma whispered, turning back. Rostova stood perfectly still, her head cocked to one side. A slow, gentle smile spread across her face. "It's not a song," she said, her voice filled with a childlike wonder. "It's a promise." The light in her eyes went out. The iron will, the sharp intellect, the fierce loyalty, all of it dissolved in an instant, replaced by that same horrifyingly peaceful emptiness. She took a step back, her movements fluid and serene, and turned to face a wall, becoming just another statue in the gallery of the damned. Sharma let out a choked cry, a sound of pure anguish, and lunged for her. I grabbed the commander's arm, pulling her back. "She's gone. Anya," I said, using her first name for the first time. "There's nothing you can do." Sharma fought against my grip, tears streaming down her face. "She was with me since the beginning." She sobbed. "I can't just leave her here." "We have to," I insisted, my voice hard. "Leaving her is how we honor her. By surviving. By fighting back." The fight went out of her then. She sagged against me, the full weight of her loss crashing down. We were four. We made it to Hangar 7 without further incident. The massive blast door hissed open to reveal a cavern filled with dust and silence. And there she was, the Stargazer. She was smaller than I remembered. A needle-nosed ship with swept-back wings, her hull plating scarred from atmospheric entries on worlds we no longer remembered the names of. She looked less like a savior and more like a forgotten ghost. "That's our ride," one of the remaining officers, a grizzled flight engineer named Corbin, grumbled. "She looks like she's held together with prayer and rust." "She'll fly," I said with more confidence than I felt. But we have to be fast. For the next hour, we worked in a frantic, desperate silence. Corbin and the other officer, a young pilot named Jorik, began the pre-flight sequence, their hands flying over consoles that hadn't been touched in a decade. Sharma, her grief now channeled into a cold, hard fury, secured the entry ramp and stood watch. My job was the null field engine. It sat in the heart of the ship, a sphere of interlocking brass rings suspended in a magnetic field. It was a beautiful, dangerous machine. Unlike the station's defensive shields, which were designed to block the lullaby, this engine was designed to mimic it, to create a counter-frequency, a psychic shadow for the ship to hide in. It was our only chance of getting through the Covenant blockade undetected. As I worked, calibrating the energy flows and aligning the emitters, Sharma came to stand beside me. "This plan of yours, Kalen," she said, her voice low and intense, silencing the singer. "It's not just a line. Is it, you have a target?" I didn't stop my work. The Covenant isn't a fleet. It's a single consciousness, a hive mind. But a mind that vast needs a nexus, a central point to process and broadcast its thoughts. They don't have a flagship in the way we'd understand it. They have what I used to call a choir. "A choir," she repeated, the word tasting like poison. "It's a ship, but it's also a living thing, a biological psychic amplifier. It takes the collective will of the Covenant and turns it into the lullaby. It's the conductor of their symphony. It doesn't fight. It doesn't have to. It just sings. And you know where to find it." "No," I admitted, finally looking up at her. "But I know how they think. The choir will be in the safest place in the system, a place of perfect orbital and gravitational balance, a place where it can sing its song with the least amount of interference." I activated the holographic map table in the engine room. The solar system shimmered into existence between us. It won't be in orbit around a planet. Too much noise. It won't be in the asteroid belt. Too much chaos. My finger traced a path out, past the orbit of Jupiter, past Saturn. I pointed to a spot in the void, a place that on any map would be considered empty space. It will be here, at the L5 Lagrange point of the Sun-Jupiter system, the perfect gravitational saddle point, utterly stable, utterly silent. Sharma stared at the map, at the single point of light that represented my guess. "You want to take this museum piece, fly it into the heart of their fleet, and attack a mythical ghost ship based on a hunch. It's the only move we have left," I said. "Everything else is just waiting for the song to end." A green light flashed on my console. The null field engine hummed to life, a low, dissonant thrum that made the teeth in my head ache. It was working. "We're ready." Corbin's voice crackled over the intercom. "But we have a problem. The hangar doors are sealed tight, and the control room is on the other side of the bay." We looked out the cockpit viewport. Across the dusty expanse of the hangar, the door control station was visible, its lights blinking placidly, and standing in front of it were a dozen of the harmonized. They had followed us. They stood in a silent, waiting crescent, their empty eyes fixed on our ship. They weren't blocking us. They were simply present. "They know," Yorick whispered from the pilot's seat. "We're not going to be able to just walk over there," Sharma said, her hand once again on her sidearm. "So we make them move." I looked at her, then back at the silent figures. An idea, cold and terrible, began to form in my mind. Yorick, power up the ship's external comms. Full broadcast, hangar wide. The young pilot looked at me, confused, but did as he was told. What are you going to do? Sharma asked. Her eyes narrowed. They listen to the lullaby because it's the only song they can hear, I said, leaning over the comms panel. I'm going to give them something else to listen to. I took a deep breath and began to speak, my voice amplified, booming across the silent hangar. But I wasn't speaking in words. I was screaming, not a scream of fear, but a scream of pure, unadulterated psychic chaos. I poured every ounce of my pain, my rage, my guilt, my terror into that soundless scream. I focused on the memory of the Gaian's last chime, on the sight of Rostova's empty eyes, on the slow, creeping death of my own species. It was the antithesis of the lullaby, a symphony of individuality, a discordant, agonizing blast of pure, raw, human noise. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, one of the harmonized flinched. Another one raised its hands to its head, its serene expression cracking, replaced by a flicker of confusion, of pain. The psychic harmony was being disrupted by a single, defiant, screaming note. They began to shuffle, to move away from the source of the noise, away from our ship, their perfect formation breaking. They stumbled back, clearing a path to the door controls. Now, Sharma, go, I yelled, my head pounding, my nose starting to bleed from the strain. Sharma didn't hesitate. She sprinted out of the ship, her weapon holstered, weaving through the disoriented echoes. She reached the console and her fingers flew across the keypad. With a deafening groan of ancient machinery, the massive hangar doors began to grind open, revealing the star-dusted blackness of the Martian night. Sharma ran back, leaping up the ramp just as it began to retract. I collapsed into a chair, the psychic assault ceasing as my will gave out. Lift off. Jorik now, Sharma commanded from the cockpit door. The Stargazer's engines roared to life, shaking the old ship to its core. We rose from the hangar floor, the dust of decades swirling around us. As we cleared the doors and ascended into the thin Martian atmosphere, a voice suddenly filled the cockpit. It wasn't over the comms. It was in our heads. It was a voice of 1,000, 1,000,000, 1,000,000,000 souls, speaking as one. It was calm, gentle, and filled with a profound, sorrowful pity. You run from peace, it said. You cling to your pain as if it were a treasure. Why do you fear the quiet? We offer you an end to suffering. We offer you eternity. Why do you choose to scream in the dark when you could join the chorus of the light, get us out of here? Sharma gritted out, her face pale. The ship lurched as Jorik pushed the engines to their limit, breaking free of Mars' weak gravity. Below us, Echo Station was just a scar in the rock, a tomb for 1,000 souls. Around us, the shimmering, silent ships of the Covenant fleet filled the void. They didn't pursue. They just watched us go. As we engaged the null field engine, cloaking ourselves in our own private storm of static, the voice faded, replaced by the lone and aching hum of our own desperate silence. We were 4 people in a forgotten ship, running on a desperate hope, heading for a place that might not exist, to fight a war we had already lost. The silence aboard the Stargazer was a fragile, wounded thing. It was a silence defined not by the absence of sound, but by the presence of the engine. The prototype null field generator didn't create a sanctuary. It created a cage of noise. It was a low, discordant hum that vibrated deep in our bones. A constant, grinding static on the edge of hearing that was designed to deafen us to the Covenant's song. The cost was a slow erosion of the self. After 3 days of flight, the constant pressure behind our eyes had become a permanent resident. We moved in a haze of fatigue, our tempers worn down to a raw nerve. Sleep offered no escape, only fractured nightmares that tasted of ozone and despair. We were a 4-person crew on a ship built for 2, and the close quarters were becoming a pressure cooker. Corbin, the engineer, had retreated into a sullen, monosyllabic relationship with his machines, his knuckles often white as he gripped a console to ride out a wave of psychic nausea. Jorik, the pilot, flew with a terrifying, stoic precision, but his youth was fraying at the edges. I would catch him staring out at the star field, his expression not one of awe, but of a man looking over the edge of a cliff, mesmerized by the fall. It was Sharma who held us together, though I could see the cracks forming in her own iron resolve. She drove us with a relentless, cold efficiency, assigning watches, running diagnostics, and rationing our meager supplies. But in the quiet moments, I would see her staring at the empty seat that had belonged to Rostova, her face a mask of grief, so profound it seemed to suck the warmth from the air around her. She saved her anger for me. On the 4th day, she cornered me in the cramped galley while I was trying to choke down a nutrient paste that tasted like chalk and regret. "This is it, isn't it?" she began, her voice low and sharp. "The whole plan. We're flying into the void on the word of a man who used to sing their song for them. How do we know you're not leading us into an ambush? Cullen, how do we know this choir isn't just a ghost story you've concocted to lead humanity's last hope into a trap?" I set the tube of paste down, my own patience worn thin, because I was there when they debated its placement. I said, my voice as weary as I felt. I sat in their resonance chambers and listened to the architects of your destruction. "They are a consciousness of pure logic, Commander." They would no sooner place their broadcast nexus in a chaotic orbit than you would build your command center on the slopes of an active volcano. It's not a guess. It's a certainty born of understanding the enemy. Understanding them, she scoffed, taking a step closer, or sympathizing with them. The accusation hung in the recycled air between us. It was the question I knew was in all their minds. Was the traitor still a traitor? I sympathized with the tune, not the lyrics. I said, meeting her fiery gaze, I understand the desire for an end to pain. I've seen what we do to ourselves, to each other. The Covenant's mistake wasn't in identifying the disease. It was in the cure. They offer a lobotomy when what we need is a reckoning. I am not leading you to a trap, Commander. I am leading you to the heart of the beast because I know for a fact that it has won. My words seemed to land. She didn't apologize, didn't soften, but she stepped back, the immediate fire in her eyes banking to a smoldering coal. See that you're right. Auditor, she said, turning to leave. Because if you're not, I'll make sure you're the first one out the airlock. The journey wore on. We were a tiny, UC silent splinter of chaos moving through a system that was falling under a spell of absolute order. We saw ships, but not as we knew them. Long, crystalline vessels of the Covenant fleet hung in the void like celestial sentinels, utterly motionless. They weren't patrolling, they were meditating. Their entire existence focused on maintaining the lullaby. Our null field held. our psychic shadow keeping us invisible to their passive senses. But there were moments the cage would rattle. We were slipping through the orbit of Jupiter, using the gas giant's immense gravity well to mask our approach to the L5 point. When it happened, an alarm, soft and insidious, chimed on Yorick's console. "Gravity distortion," he announced, his voice tight. "Dead ahead. It's not natural." On the main screen, there was nothing but the black of space. But the ship's gravimetric sensors were showing a web, a net of invisible traps laid across the void. "It's a minefield," Corbin grunted from his station. "But they're not explosive." "They don't need to be," I said, a cold dread creeping up my spine. "They're resonance mines. Get too close, and they'll pulse a localized, high-frequency version of the lullaby, powerful enough to overwhelm our field. It won't destroy the ship. It'll just put us to sleep." Jorik's hands were steady on the controls, his knuckles white. "I can navigate us through," he said. "The gaps are tight, but the pattern is stable." For the next hour, we held our breath as our young pilot performed a masterclass in precision flying. The stargazer danced through the invisible web, a ghost slipping through the cracks in a god's defenses. But halfway through, one of the mines pulsed. It must have been a random detonation, a flaw in its design, but it was close enough. The null field engine whined, the dissonant hum rising in pitch to a scream. The lights in the cockpit flickered, and for 3 horrifying seconds, the lullaby bled through. It wasn't a voice this time. It was a feeling. A sudden, profound sense of peace. A wave of warmth that washed away all fear, all grief, all anger. The ache behind my eyes vanished. The knot of tension in my gut dissolved. I saw Sharma's shoulders slump, the hard lines of her face softening into a gentle, weary acceptance. Corbin leaned back in his chair, a faint smile touching his lips. It was the most seductive, most wonderful feeling I had ever experienced. It was the promise of an end to struggle. It was the promise of home. "Let go," it whispered in the core of my being. "Your fight is over. You are loved. You are safe. Just rest." It was me who broke the spell. The memory of my psychic scream in the hangar, the raw, agonizing feel of it, was still a fresh wound in my mind. I clung to that pain, to that jagged edge of my own brokenness, and I pushed back. "Yoriks," I yelled, my voice sounding harsh and ugly in the sudden quiet. "Fly the ship." The pilot's head snapped up, his eyes wide with a dazed confusion. The spell was broken, the null field restabilized, its familiar, ugly hum crashing back in, and the beautiful peace was gone, leaving us gasping and trembling in its wake. We were through the minefield. We were safe, but we had all tasted the poison, and we had all, for one brief, terrible moment, found it sweet. No one spoke for a long time after that. The shared experience, the shared temptation, had changed the dynamic between us. We were no longer just a commander, a trader, an engineer, and a pilot. We were 4 people who had looked into the welcoming abyss and had, for a second, wanted to jump. We had seen the enemy, not as a fleet of alien ships, but as a weakness within our own hearts. Finally, after another day of silent, tense flight, we arrived. "We're at the L5 point," Jorik announced, his voice hushed. "Cutting main drive, all systems running silent. The constant, grinding vibration of the ship ceased. We drifted in the perfect stillness of the Lagrange point. Before us, where there should have been nothing but empty space, was the choir. It was not a ship. It was a cathedral. It was a vast, sprawling structure of what looked like spun moonlight and living bone. A lattice of crystalline towers and softly pulsing biological sacs that stretched for miles. It glittered with its own internal light, a soft, pearlescent glow that was both beautiful and utterly alien. It didn't have engines or weapons or viewports. It was a living instrument, a harp for a god, built to play a single, system-spanning note. It was more vast, more ancient, more terrifyingly elegant than anything I could have ever described. Gods above, Corbin whispered, his cynicism finally shattered by the sheer, overwhelming reality of it. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what surrounded it, fused into its living architecture, like flies caught in a spider's web, were other ships. Dozens of them, not just Covenant vessels, but ships of other species. I recognized the elegant, sail-like ships of the long-lost Cygnian race, the blocky, functional freighters of the Gaian, and, worst of all, a handful of human ships. I recognized one of them, the Odyssey, Earth's first interstellar colony vessel, lost with all hands over a century ago. Its hull was encrusted with the choir's crystalline growth, its proud human markings almost obscured. It wasn't a ruin, it was a component. Its old power core and communication systems integrated into the larger structure turned into another amplifier for the Covenant's song. They hadn't destroyed the explorers who came before us. They had conscripted them. As we stared, paralyzed by the sight, a new horror unfolded. A section of the choir's pulsing surface opened like a great, slow-blinking eye. From within, something emerged. It was one of our ships, a human destroyer, the Valiant, which had been reported destroyed in a skirmish near Mars just last year, but it was changed. Its hull was covered in the same pearlescent, biological armor. It moved with an unnatural grace, its weapon ports sealed, its purpose rewritten. It was no longer a warship. It was a guard. It began a slow, deliberate patrol around the choir, a harmonized vessel protecting its god. Sharma stared at the transponder reading that confirmed the ship's identity, her face a pale, horrified mask. "They're not just conquering us," she whispered, her voice trembling. "They're harvesting us." And as the Valiant passed by on its silent, patient watch, we saw that it wasn't alone. Trailing behind it, like pilotfish accompanying a great shark, were 3 smaller ships, human fighters, our best. Their engines glowed with a soft, placid light. Their pilots now silent servants of the song they had once fought against. Our plan had been to find the singer and silence it, but we were 4 souls in a rusty relic, and the singer was a god, guarded by the ghosts of our own fallen. The sight of the Valiant, a proud warship turned into a harmonized ghost, broke something in us. The sheer, overwhelming scale of the choir had been terrifying, but this was intimate. This was a violation. It was the equivalent of seeing a loved one's corpse reanimated and set to guard the gates of your own prison. For a long, silent time, we just floated there in our little bubble of noise, invisible witnesses to the desecration of our own history. Hope, already a flickering candle in a hurricane, was nearly extinguished. Yorick was the first to speak, his voice a choked whisper. "What do we do?" "Commander, we can't fight that." He didn't need to elaborate. That was everything in the cathedral ship, the captured fleet, the silent, patient guards. Corbin, ever the pragmatist, just shook his head, his eyes fixed on the stargazer's dwindling energy readings. "He's right," the engineer rasped. "This ship's prototype engine is already eating itself alive, just keeping us hidden. A sustained fight. We wouldn't last 30 seconds. We don't have the weapons. We don't have the power. And we sure as hell don't have the numbers." Sharma stood motionless, her gaze locked on the captured destroyer. I could see the battle raging behind her eyes. Every instinct she had, every ounce of her training, was screaming for a target, for a plan of attack, for a glorious, defiant last stand. But her logic, cold and brutal, was telling her what we all knew: a direct assault wasn't a last stand. It was just suicide, pointless and unobserved. She turned away from the viewport, her face a pale, hard mask, and looked at me. The contempt was gone, replaced by a raw, desperate clarity. "You got us here, Kalen," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "You told us to go after the singer. Well, there it is. What's your plan for killing a god?" The question was a challenge, a plea, and a death sentence all rolled into one. They were all looking at me now, their faces gaunt in the dim cockpit light. They had followed the traitor into the heart of the abyss, and now they needed him to show them the way out. My mind raced, sifting through everything I knew about the Covenant, their logic, their limitations. They were powerful, but their power was based on harmony, on a single, unified consciousness. They were an ocean, and an ocean cannot easily perceive a single unsilent drop of rain. Our strength wasn't in our noise. It was in our ability to be small, to be insignificant, to be a discordant note they wouldn't even register. "We can't fight it from the outside," I said, the plan forming in my mind, cold and insane. "We have to get inside. Not the choir. Not yet. We start with the Valiant." Sharma stared at me as if I'd lost my mind. Aboard a harmonized ship, crawling with their puppets. Why? Because it's the one thing they'll never expect, I explained, my voice gaining a feverish intensity. They don't think in terms of boarding parties or Trojan horses. Such concepts are born of individuality and deception, things they've literally bred out of themselves. And more than that, I pointed to the captured destroyer. That ship is our key. Its human technology, its systems, its command structure, we know it. If we can get to its bridge, we can access its sensor logs, its communication relays. We can learn how it's connected to the choir, how it's controlled. We can find a weakness from the inside. It was a sliver of a chance. A plan built on a foundation of assumptions and desperate hope. But it was better than the alternative, which was to drift here until our engine died and the lullaby took us. Corbin was the one to voice the obvious flaw. Great plan, except for one thing. How do we get close enough to board it without that thing or one of its little fighter escorts turning us into plasma dust? Our null field hides us. But the second we make a move, we're on their scopes. "We don't hide," I said, a chill running down my own spine at the words. "We reveal ourselves, but on our own terms." I moved to the console for the null field engine, the machine that was our only protection. "Corbin, I need you to help me modify the engine's output. We're not going to project a field of chaos. We're going to project a single focused psychic frequency. What kind of frequency? Sharma asked, her suspicion returning. The frequency of surrender, I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. A signal of a mind that has given up the fight, that is ready to be harmonized. We'll make the Stargazer look like a ship whose crew has finally succumbed to the lullaby. We'll fly right up to the Valiant like a lost lamb coming home to the flock. There was a long, terrible silence in the cockpit. The idea was abhorrent, a violation of everything we were fighting for. It was a lie that felt too much like the truth. No, Sharma said, her voice flat. Absolutely not. We are not raising a white flag. It's not a white flag. It's a key. I shot back, turning to face her. It's a psychic key that will unlock their front door. They don't have protocols for this. Commander. They won't see a threat. They'll see a success. A lost soul coming into the fold. They'll let us get close. They might even try to dock with us, to welcome us. It's our only way in. We argued for what felt like an eternity. But in the end, there was no other option. It was my insane plan or a slow death in the void. With a grim, reluctant nod from Sharma, Corbin and I set to work. It was a perversion of engineering. We spent 2 hours twisting the beautiful Kurtotsodar's chaotic logic of the null field generator, dampening its storm and forcing it to emit a single, placid, coherent wave, the psychic equivalent of a flat line. The approach was the most terrifying thing I have ever done. Jorik, his face beaded with sweat, eased the Stargazer out from behind the cover of a small ice asteroid we had been using for cover. We dropped our chaotic shield and began to broadcast our lie. Instantly, I felt the lullaby begin to press in at the edges of my mind. A gentle, insistent whisper. The new field was holding it at bay, but only by pretending to agree with it. It was like holding back a flood with a sheet of paper painted to look like water. The Valiant and its 3 fighter escorts continued their slow, silent patrol. We moved towards them, a tiny ship broadcasting its psychic surrender. My heart hammered against my ribs. Every instinct screamed that this was a mistake, that at any moment, plasma bolts would tear through our hull. The lead fighter broke formation. It turned, its engines glowing softly, and began to approach us. This was it. Jorik's hands tightened on the controls. Sharma's hand rested on a panel that would overload our ship's reactor, her final, defiant act. The fighter closed the distance, its form growing in our viewport. It didn't arm its weapons. It didn't accelerate. It simply flew alongside us, a silent, curious observer. Then, from the Valiant itself, a signal came through. Not a voice, not a communication, but a feeling projected directly into our minds. It was a wave of gentle, welcoming approval. Come, it seemed to say. You are welcome. You are home. The harmonized destroyer opened a docking clamp on its ventral side. An invitation. We docked with the ghost ship. The sound of our magnetic clamps locking onto its hull was like the lid of a coffin closing shut. There was no welcoming party, no boarding tube, just the cold, final thud of metal on metal. We were attached to the belly of the beast. We cut through the hull here, Sharma said, pointing to a spot on the schematics. It's a maintenance corridor. Should be unmonitored. We donned our environment suits, the 4 of us crowding into the small airlock. The plan was simple. Get to the bridge, access the systems, and get out. But as the outer door of the airlock hissed open, revealing the cold, scarred hull of the Valiant, I knew that nothing about this would be simple. Cutting through the hull took 10 agonizing minutes. Finally, a section of metal peeled away, revealing a dark, silent corridor beyond. We slipped through one by one, into the graveyard of the Valiant. The inside of the ship was wrong. The emergency lights cast a faint, sickly green glow on the walls, and over the hard lines of human engineering, the Covenant's influence was visible, translucent. Vein-like conduits pulsed with a soft light, crawling over the steel bulkheads like alien ivy. The air was cold and still, carrying a faint, sweet smell like ozone and overripe fruit. But the worst part was the silence. It was a living silence, thick and watchful. There were no engine sounds, no crew chatter, no clatter of boots on the deck. The only sound was our own ragged breathing in our helmets. We moved like phantoms through the dead ship, our weapons raised, every shadow a potential threat. But the threats, when they came, were not what we expected. In a side corridor, we found the first of the crew. It was a young ensign, slumped against a wall, his eyes open and placid, a faint smile on his lips. He wasn't dead. His chest rose and fell in a slow, steady rhythm. He was simply gone. As we watched, a thin, glowing tendril descended from one of the alien conduits on the ceiling and gently brushed against his temple. The ensign's smile deepened. The ship was feeding them, keeping their bodies alive while their minds served the choir. We backed away slowly, a wave of nausea washing over me. We were not in a tomb. We were in a nursery. The journey to the bridge was a gallery of these horrors. We found them in their bunks, at their posts, in the mess hall, all of them lost in their serene, waking dream, tended to by the ship's new biological systems. Sharma had to physically restrain Corbin from trying to shake one of the sleeping crew members awake. We finally reached the armored doors of the bridge. They were sealed. No power, Corbin grunted, running a diagnostic tool over the keypad. I'll have to cut it. As his plasma torch began to hiss against the metal, a new sound reached us, a soft, melodic humming. From down the corridor, a figure approached. It was the Valiant's captain, a woman I recognized from intelligence briefings, Captain Ava Rostova's sister, as fate's cruel sense of humor would have it. She walked with a slow, graceful gait, her eyes unfocused, humming a tune that was both alien and hauntingly familiar. She wasn't armed. She wasn't hostile. She just walked towards us, a serene smile on her face. She was going to walk right into Corbin's plasma torch. "Stop her," Sharma hissed. I stepped forward, placing myself in the captain's path. "Captain," I said, my voice muffled by the helmet. She didn't seem to see me. She started to walk around me. I grabbed her arm. It was like touching a statue. There was no resistance, no reaction. But the humming stopped. She slowly turned her head, and her empty eyes focused on me. For a fleeting second, I saw a flicker of something in their depths: confusion, pain, a soul trapped behind a wall of glass. And then the lullaby, amplified by our proximity to the choir, washed over me. "Why do you hurt them?" a chorus of voices whispered in my mind. "They are at peace. Let them be." The captain raised her other hand and gently touched my helmet. "Join us," her own voice whispered, not from her lips, but in my head. It is so quiet here. My will began to buckle. The peace she offered was a siren's call. But then I saw Sharma behind her, her face a portrait of agony as she looked at the woman who wore her sister's face. That pain, that raw, human grief, was the anchor I needed. I pushed the captain back, gently but firmly, and stepped away. The moment was broken. The light in her eyes vanished, and she resumed her silent, aimless humming, turning and walking back the way she came. With a final, sickening groan, the bridge door fell away. We stepped inside. The bridge was like the rest of the ship, a fusion of human tech and alien biology. The main view screen was dark, but the room was filled with the soft glow of the Covenant conduits that wrapped around every console, every chair, every still and silent crew member. And in the captain's chair sat Captain Rostova, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes fixed on a universe only she could see. My hands shook as I brushed aside a web of pulsing fibers and activated an auxiliary console. I needed to know how this had happened, how they were connected. Data streams, alien and incomprehensible, flooded the screen, but beneath them, buried in the ship's core memory, I found fragments of the original logs. The ship's last moments of sanity. It was a nightmare. The lullaby hadn't been an attack. It had been a slow, creeping infection. It started with strange, peaceful dreams, then moments of waking tranquility, then a gradual erosion of will, of identity. The last log entry was from the captain herself. Her voice was slurred, calm, but the words were a scream. "It's in our heads," she said. "God help us. It's so beautiful. I see the pattern. We're not dying. We're becoming. We are the chorus." The log cut out. They hadn't been conquered. They had converted. They had opened the door and welcomed the monster in. As I dug deeper, past the logs, into the new alien code that now ran the ship, I found the truth. The Valiant wasn't just a guard or a conscripted vessel. The human minds of its crew, with their unique capacity for chaos, creativity, and pattern recognition, were being used as a psychic filter. They were a focusing lens, taking the raw, alien consciousness of the Covenant and refining the lullaby, tuning it specifically to be more effective against other humans. They weren't just prisoners. They were a weapon. We were being dismantled by the ghosts of our own people. As this horrifying realization dawned on me, I saw the connection, the data stream that flowed from the Valiant's main computer directly into the heart of the choir. It was a two-way street, a conduit. We couldn't destroy the choir with our single, tiny ship, but the Valiant was already inside their mind. I looked up from the console, my eyes meeting Sharma's. The despair was gone, replaced by a new, terrible fire. "I was wrong," I said, my voice trembling with the audacity of the idea. "We're not here to find a weakness. We're here to make one. We can't blow up the cathedral from the outside." I pointed to the glowing conduits that linked the human bridge to the alien god. "But we can poison the choir from the pews." The air on the bridge of the Valiant grew thick with the weight of my words. Poison the choir from the pews. It was a declaration of a war we hadn't known we could fight. A war not of plasma and steel, but of memory and meaning. Sharma stared at me, her face a battleground of horror and dawning, terrible understanding. She saw the shape of the idea, its monstrous, beautiful logic. We weren't going to destroy their god. We were going to give it a soul, and we were going to make that soul human. "How?" she breathed. the single word encompassing a universe of impossibility. The crew, I said, gesturing to the silent, dreaming figures around us. They're the weapon. Their minds are the conduit. The Covenant is using them to translate its consciousness into a form humans can understand. We're going to reverse the flow. We're going to use them to broadcast something the Covenant can't understand. Broadcast what? Corbin asked, his voice rough with a new, fragile hope. A computer virus, some kind of logic bomb. No, I said, shaking my head. Code is just logic. They are masters of logic. We can't beat them at their own game. We have to give them something that has no logic, something that cannot be harmonized or resolved. I looked from the engineer to the pilot, and finally to the commander. We're going to broadcast a memory, our memory, the story of humanity, in all its chaotic, contradictory, painful, and glorious insanity. The plan was madness, born of desperation and a traitor's insight. While Corbin, his hands moving with a newfound, feverish purpose, began to work on the alien console, I explained, he wasn't trying to hack their systems, he was trying to build a bridge. His goal was to isolate the psychic conduit that linked the crew to the choir and hijack it, turning it from a receiver into a transmitter. Sharma and Jorik stood guard, their weapons moving in slow, deliberate arcs, watching the silent corridors for any sign of change. My job was to assemble the poison. I plunged back into the Valiant's databanks, but I wasn't looking for tactical data. I was looking for the ship's cultural archives. Every human vessel carried one, a digital ark containing the sum of our history, our art, our science, our folly. It was all there, the symphonies of Beethoven and the screaming guitars of the rage bands, the works of Shakespeare and the last desperate poems written in the climate war bunkers, the footage of the first man on the moon, and the last broadcast from a city as it drowned beneath the rising seas. I began to weave it all together, not into a coherent history, but into a psychic tapestry of pure, unfiltered experience. I took the elation of a scientific breakthrough and spliced it with the gut-wrenching grief of a mother losing her child. I took the quiet intimacy of a lover's whisper and laid it over the roar of a battlefield. I took our boundless capacity for kindness and showed its horrifying twin, our endless talent for cruelty. It was a weapon made of paradoxes, love and hate, creation and destruction, hope and despair, all screaming at the same time. It was the human condition, weaponized. It's not enough. Corbin grunted after an hour, sweat beading on his forehead. I can open the channel, but I can't force a broadcast. The signal is passive. It needs a host, a conscious, living mind to focus the signal, to give it intent. We all knew what he meant. The data was just a collection of ghosts. To turn it into a poison, someone had to drink it first. Someone had to become the storyteller, the living heart of the broadcast. My eyes met Sharma's. In that moment, an entire conversation passed between us without a word. I saw the commander in her, ready to make the sacrifice herself. I saw the soldier, weighing the tactical cost, and I saw the human, terrified of the abyss. But this wasn't her sacrifice to make. This was my atonement. This was the final payment for a debt I had incurred long ago on a world of silent, crystalline chimes. It has to be me, I said, my voice calm, the decision settling over me with a strange, final peace. The Covenant's consciousness is alien. For the signal to penetrate, it needs a translator, someone who understands their language of thought, someone who has felt their peace. I'm the only one who can make them listen. Sharma opened her mouth to argue, but I cut her off. This is not a debate. Commander, this is the endgame. Get the Stargazer ready to fly. The moment the broadcast starts, the choir will react. You'll have one chance to get away. I turned to Corbin. Wire me in. The process was crude and brutal. Corbin jury-rigged a neural interface from the captain's chair, connecting it to the alien conduit. As I sat down, I could feel the ship, the sleeping minds of its crew, and beyond them, the vast, silent presence of the choir, a slumbering god waiting just beyond a thin veil of reality. As the final connection was made, Sharma came to stand before me. She placed a hand on my shoulder, her grip firm, her expression stripped of all anger, all suspicion, leaving only a profound, sorrowful respect. No matter what happens, Kaylin, she said, her voice thick with emotion, you came home. Thank you. I gave her a small, tight nod. The only reply I could manage. Make it count. Anya, I whispered. Make them remember us. Then Corbin threw the switch. The universe dissolved. My consciousness was ripped from my body and thrown into a current of 1 billion sleeping souls. I felt the crew of the Valiant around me, their dreams, their faded memories, their endless, placid peace, and through them, I felt the choir. It was a consciousness the size of a solar system, a being of pure, serene, untroubled logic. It felt my presence, a tiny, unexpected flicker of discord, and it turned its immense, gentle curiosity towards me. It was like being seen by a mountain. And then I opened my mouth, and I began to scream our story into its mind. I gave it the terror of a child in the dark and the fierce, defiant love of the parent who stands at the door. I gave it the quiet satisfaction of a farmer watching his crops grow and the black, bitter rage of the soldier who has to burn that same field. I gave it the agony of a broken heart and the impossible, illogical hope that drives a person to love again. I poured the whole chaotic, beautiful, terrible truth of our existence directly into the heart of its perfect, sterile peace. For a moment, there was only confusion. The vast mind of the Covenant tried to understand, to categorize, to harmonize the signal. It tried to find the logic in our illogical passions, the reason in our unreasonable hope. But there was none. It was a paradox it could not solve. It was a song it could not sing. And then the harmony began to break. I felt a tremor in the collective, a flicker of something it had not felt in 1,000,000 years' dissonance. The lullaby, the constant, gentle hum that had defined its existence, began to waver. I pushed harder, pouring my own memories into the torrent, my guilt, my betrayal, my desperate flight, my final, defiant choice. I was no longer just a broadcaster. I was the poison itself. The choir screamed. It was not a sound, but a psychic shriek that echoed across the system. The crystalline structure of the cathedral ship began to tremble, its internal light flickering wildly from placid white to a violent, angry red. On the bridge of the Valiant, the sleeping crew began to stir, not waking, but spasming as the feedback loop of psychic agony tore through them. The glowing conduits on the walls pulsed and burst, spewing a foul-smelling ichor. The ship was dying from the inside out. Go! I managed to scream through my gritted teeth. The single word, a physical agony. Now, through a haze of pain, I saw Sharma nod, her face streaked with tears. She pulled Corbin and Yorick towards the door. She gave me one last look, a look of grief and gratitude, and then she was gone. I was alone with the dying god. The lullaby was gone, replaced by a cacophony of a billion voices screaming in confusion. The perfect peace was shattered, replaced by the raw, unfiltered chaos of 1,000 different emotions. I felt the minds of the other conscripted species in the choir, the Gaian, the Signian stirring from their long slumber, their own ancient pains adding to the din. I had not killed the choir. I had woken it up, and in its agony, it was tearing itself apart. My last sensation was one of immense, terrible, and beautiful noise. The sound of a universe remembering how to feel. From the viewport of the fleeing stargazer, Sharma watched the choir die. It didn't explode. It dissolved. The beautiful crystalline structure crumbled into dust, the biological sacs deflating and turning gray. The captured ships, including the Valiant, broke free from its grasp, their lights dark, their systems dead. The lullaby was gone. The silence that fell over the solar system was absolute, a silence so profound it was like the universe holding its breath. Their journey back to Mars was quiet. When they arrived, they found a world of ghosts waking from a 30-year dream. The echoes were gone, but the people who remained were lost, their minds scoured by the sudden absence of the song that had defined their lives. They were free, but they were broken. Humanity had been saved, not by an army or a weapon, but by a story. We had held up a mirror to the face of a god, and the reflection had shattered it. Commander Anya Sharma stood on the surface of Mars weeks later, looking up at the pale blue dot of Earth in the sky. Kalen's name would never be in a history book. There would be no statues, no monuments. His sacrifice was as silent and as vast as the space he had disappeared into. The war was over, but the struggle had just begun. Humanity was free. The silence was deafening, and in it, for the first time in a generation, we had to learn how to speak.